Sorry! Really goofed. Oh, that was embarrassing. Okay, round 2! I won't fuck up this time. This time I'll stick more with these than like maybe switch to Hand of Millennium like in her phase 2 when I have an opening. Hey, Jason! Wow. Right now, just waiting to get summoned. I hope you guys been well. Ah, you'll get it. Yep. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, Origins. Mm-hmm. Man, those assholes fucked Dragon Age over so bad. Yay! Yay! Finally! This time I won't screw up. Oh yeah, Origins and oh yeah, the second one, that's a good one. Those are good. Inquisition's not too bad either. Yep, thanks. I'm going to need it. Oh, okay. Sorry. I won't say shit. I gotta do something real quick. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Yay! Excuse me.
Hi, I'm Arthur. This is probably the most requested video I've ever had in a very, very long time. In all of my comment sections for like the last 6 months now, there has been one simple question, something so invasive that honestly I put in more time just to get my research done on them than most of my other videos. This singular question has been haunting my dreams for long enough, and it's time to answer the simple question of when space sharks. Well, my little gremlos, it is time for space sharks. I'm going to break down their lore, give my opinions, a few weird stories from my past, and then also discuss some oddities about them. And yes, we will be discussing him at length. Regardless, I want you all to sit back, relax, and try to enjoy this video. It's going to be a long one, and in general, with all the reading I have to do for a single Space Marine chapter, it goddamn better well be a long video. To justify the length, to secure the bag, and also promote something I actually enjoy quite a lot, I do have a sponsor for this video. Someone who has been here at least once. You know him and you love him. Let's talk about War Thunder for just a second before going. The Carcharodons, the Space Sharks, the Pale Hunter setting, the reason they're just weird. Not in like an eccentric kind of way, more so in they break a lot of the cardinal rules that Space Marines tend to follow, but for some reason they do it in such a cool way that no one really cares that much. Like, they are aggressively melee focused in terms of a chapter and devout to the Emperor, but they are also incredibly silent in how they go about it. They have the discipline of the stealthy chapter, but the execution of the Black Templars if they merge with the Flash Terrors, and that's the best way to see them. They're an especially violent monster of a chapter. But what are the basics of what we know about them? The short end of it, they are basically one of the weirder chapters in that they are a predation fleet, where they essentially migrate around the sector in a fully fleet of ships in different numbers, depending on the difficulty of the location that they're in, which, by the way, they're in the Outer Dark, which is pretty bad, and usually the fighting ends up being against Tyranids, I mind you, but not being afraid to take up arms against Dandy or anything else that's in there as well. They kind of just get around the laws. They do technically have a homeworld, but it's complicated. Once we get into their history, and especially the Bad Eye War, we will talk about that, but for now we're just going to be covering the basics of what you need to know to understand the chapter from a top-down current perspective. Like, the stuff you need to understand just to kind of get by. So, in as simplest terms as humanly possible, the Carcharodons, Astra, the Space Sharks, they are the ultimate make-do with what we have chapter Marines, pretty much the history of this universe. With almost no access to resources, they are probably one of the most resourceful chapters around. They abstain from contemporary resources as a means of penance for a crime we don't fully understand, but I could take a few guesses. In order to restock on certs, chapter candidates, weapons, armor, and just basic supplies, they partake in two almost ritualistic set of rites. Something that they say is their God-given right, but it's more they just use that as an excuse for people not to question the 7 to 8 foot tall men that show up covered in gore, and that is the Grey Tides and the Red Tides. They're pretty radical names, but the Grey Tide is where they hunt down archaeotech wherever they go, stealing it from any planet they can find. And they use this archaeotech as a bartering chip with the tech priests of Mars in order to secure new war gear through a pact that is officially sealed under the name of the Navy Decree of F-34. Though, due to this being a bit limited in scope, the chapter is often pretty protective of old war gear, and they are also usually down to the wire with the shittiest patterns of power armor they can get their hands on, mismatched and very heavily augmented in order to work, with none of their suits of power armor being 100% working all plate, which is, if you don't know much about it, it's kind of the worst one. I think it does provide them with a cool look, and it does lead to them having some weird-ass weapon and armor mashups. Like, their Relic Terminator armors are described as being pretty damn decorated, but still being mismatched, caked in scars and battle damage that has only been loosely repaired. The First Company veterans that usually wear them, by the way, are known as the Red Brethren. Doesn't really mean that they're actually red or have any red decorations. It's actually kind of funny because they end up going into the battlefield clean as a whistle and then leaving so thoroughly caked in gore and viscera that you'd think at first sight, just from the color alone, that they're a Blood Angel successor. But yeah, all their gear is more or less ancient by default, but also alongside that, you have the red...
Right now I'm watching a lore vid on the Carcharodons, and between summons. So I won't get bored.
They they basically just need to abduct a small world population without telling anyone. They get bodies, and that's all that matters. Serfs, potential battle brothers, servants, and so on, so forth. It's pretty neat. They usually raid places that are far out of Imperial aid, so that when they do it, they don't have to worry about an Inquisitor showing up, and if they do, it'll happen later. In the book Red Tide, that's basically the entire principle of the plot. Albeit there is a bit more at stake, like an untainted psyker, but, you know, we get there later. Regardless, these two means of stealing to sell and stealing people can be considered morally reprehensible, and, well, you're right, but in a very Night Lord's way of going about this, the ends do justify the means here, as they are damn good at their job. They're one of the most important tools to fight off the horrors of the Underdark, and because of that, they kind of just need to do what they do. They have strict codes of honor, but the honor itself doesn't really extend to humanity, more just a respect to their own disciplines and doctrines that are almost 100% in their chapter. So if you're not in their chapter, they don't really give a shit about you. And hell, unless you're a fully blooded battle brother, you are probably going to barely even be recognized as a living entity that breathes. And that comes down to the fact that, like, if you are not tough enough to become a fully blooded battle brother, you are not really going to be cut out for this, because you're going to be put through scenarios that are going to likely test you. It's actually a common practice in the chapter that if you are a scout or a member of the scout company, until you have fully blooded yourself in several different campaigns, meaning killed several people, monsters, or what have you during a campaign, you are not even allowed a name. You are given a designation, that is it, a numbered code with sigils and symbols to represent who you are. The second you cross this kind of threshold to be considered a tough enough dude that you could potentially be a worthwhile battle brother, you are given what is referred to as a void name, which is your new name. That's inherent to the chapter's culture. So these names are written in High Gothic, and it's kind of interesting to mention the High Gothic part of things, because the entirety of the chapter doesn't speak Low Gothic, and they barely speak regular High Gothic. They speak an archaic form of High Gothic, and for those of you who don't know, the best way to see High Gothic and Low Gothic, the difference is that Low Gothic is basically like speaking English. It is a butchered language that is simplistic and easy to understand, while High Gothic is like speaking Latin. It's the root of a lot of different languages, and it's not as easy to understand. But the Carcharodons speak an ancient dialect of High Gothic, and it's said to be such a formal way of speaking that when people actually try and speak with them, it's described as they're speaking like they're narrating an instructions manual from some ancient text. It kind of gives them a more mechanical feel in nature to how they act and speak. So people who speak with them, even if they speak High Gothic, sometimes have trouble understanding them just because of how old it is. The reason this is very interesting, though, as with most of 40k, is it's kind of unconfirmed. Why? I'll give you my reason why. I know why, but it's later. We'll cover it in the history. I'm just trying to keep these sections divided. I'm baiting the hook, I know. But if there's one thing I'm good at, it's being pedantic and faffing about so much that people start to get frustrated. And, yeah, outside of the basics of their tithes and lifestyles, the Space Sharks' combat tactics are probably one of the reasons people think they're so cool. They are just so incredibly violent. It's actually described as being close in scale to the more unhinged members of the Blood Angel successors in just how absolutely violent it is. They crash on people like a tsunami and shred them to pieces like some kind of oceanic predator. They decorate their weapons and armor with different fish accoutrements similar to that of like a shark or some other underwater fish predator. Though usually it is the, shark motif, because, GW has to be on the nose about damn near everything. This goes all the way down to the close range weapons, where, say, their chain axes and chain swords, which is what they're preferred, are often modified that they do not have the hook-bladed teeth, like the Mica Dragon teeth that the standard chainswords have. They actually customize them to be a serrated edge that is more pointed and triangular in shape. It's similar to that of a shark's tooth, obviously, which is fucking awesome. They prefer to attack similar to that of a great ocean predator. They swim in, take a chunk out, and then if it grievously injures them, they go in for the kill. But if they see that they don't have an immediate advantage, they back away and then adjust in order to...
Sorry, there's like long spans of time with like no session. Sometimes it just takes a while.
It's very much shock troop tactics, but especially more violent and gruesome. They do so while being completely silent, by the way. There is no chanting battle hymns. There is simply the silence of the void as they come in like sharks and then just strike. They are an incredibly disciplined force of Marines as well, being able to control themselves due to a genetic curse known as the blindness that affects almost every single one of their members, which isn't the only genetic curse. Their bodies over time get covered in scales. Their eyes turn black like that of a doll's. Weirdly enough, people draw them along with shark teeth. This is kind of a misnomer. The shark teeth isn't actually a mutation that they undergo. It's more of a cultural thing. They actually sharpen their teeth and carve them down so that they have the point, sometimes even getting their entire jaws replaced with metal chompers to be closer to their, DeviantArt fish sona. So, with the basics of the chapter out of the way, let's switch gears a bit and touch upon history, blindness, and where they started, or at least the most widely recognized location where they started. And, speaking of, where did they start? As far as history goes for the Carcharodons, we don't know too much. The thing you all need to understand is that 2/3 of their lore is pretty much wrapped up in any supplement involving the Badab War, as well as any Imperial Armory book, which, on either side of that spectrum, is basically just an especially large codex entry with very weird tidbits of lore. And I will say, I love codex entries. They're really fun ways to get a brief idea of what something is in the lore, but they're there to gas up whatever they're talking about, which, yeah, it's cool, but it's not really a good source of unbiased information. No. So the other third of the info that we have is in the disparate novels we have about the various different adventures with the Carcharodons, which is both more than you'd expect, still less than you'd hope. It gives us a bit of a framework to understand them a little bit more. And from their perspective, they are penitents who were sent into exile thousands of years ago. They assume they were from the Sentinel Foundry, which I'm just going to tell you is just wrong. That's just incorrect, at least from my perspective, though looking it up online, a lot of people seem to have the same opinion of me when it comes to that specific conclusion. Their origins tie into a very weird theory, that they are somehow related to the Night Lords, which is bullshit, wacky malarkey, though I get where it comes from. See, it's a common trope in the Horus heresy that Corvus, Corax, and the Night Haunter were often compared, especially on the side of their legion, as they both kind of represent very similar ideas in how to prosecute wars. See, the Raven Guard use a form of fear tactic when they engage in wars with others, while the Night Lords are, basically do the same thing, just a little bit more gusto involved in causing fear and pain.
I'll wait a little bit longer, maybe I'll pop on the mode.
Both seem to enjoy their jobs, with the Night Lords enjoying it enough to make us all a little bit uncomfortable if they start talking about it. So, it's pretty obvious people tend to compare them, which is why when people say that the Carcharodon Astra are Night Lord stock, it's because they do the whole ultra-violence thing like them, more so than the stealthy thing like the Raven Guard. But I'm sorry to dispel this myth, but that's bullshit and a poopy bad thing. These boys are 100% Raven Guard. Hell, the theory that they are partially made from the gene seed of World Eaters makes more sense to me, to be honest. But yeah, the reason why they are so violent is often overlooked, and it's a gene seed curse that the Raven Guard suffer. Talk about it because it's not nearly as glamorous as the other ones. But comically enough, the Raven Guard have a very similar curse to that of the Blood Angels, where their Marines will, if pushed too far in a combat scenario, or sometimes just for no reasons, just go berserk. It's a lot more sullen than the Black Rage and a little bit more stable, but the Sable brand causes their gene seed to become hyper-processed. Their skin turns almost luminescent white to match Corvus Corax, their eyes turn black as pitch if they weren't already, and an urge to do nothing but kill fills them in as efficient and meaningful a way as possible. They are a bit more coherent than those who fall to the Black Rage, like I was saying, but these individuals mercilessly slaughter who they deem as any enemy, which more often than not is a lot of people. Unlike the Black Rage, they can come back from the Sable brand through many different methods. It was practiced during the Horus Heresy, or at least pre-Horus Heresy, how to make it go away, and there was like mixed success, so they just allowed you to choose whichever one worked for you. Meditation, seclusion, or just full-on engaging in your most brutal urges brought about by the Sable brand. I don't know, whatever works, man. Though it is often taught to individuals who are afflicted with the Sable brand weapon misuse of the Shadow Killers. Well, that's a topic today. They may not be a regular man, they have kind of fallen into base urges, but they can still be abused in the chapter just because of how much more violent they can be. So they also are encouraged to use a mixture of discipline and combat so that they're able to
Jason!
these urges while they're trying to get them out to make the battle less work for the chapter rather than having a liability like a lot of death company for the Blood Angels. Now, I'm going to say this, and I don't mean to sound like I'm saying I told you so, but that sounds a little bit familiar, doesn't it? You know, intense battle lust and extreme discipline. Okay, I'll just say it in simpler terms that even the babies in the back can understand. The Carcharodon Astra are in flesh terrors, but Raven Guard. They were fostering the genetic curse of the Sable brand to the point where almost every single individual member of the Carcharodons manifest their version of it. Though with the Carcharodons, it's actually referred to as the blindness, where they are just always angry all the time. With this out of the way, where did the Carcharodons actually come from? Why do they have such a weird coping mechanism to deal with this? And why do they call it the blindness? It's unconfirmed, but it's unconfirmed in the way a lot of things in 40k are, like with the Soul Drinkers, how most people don't really even consider them an Imperial Fist successor, even though it's like almost 100% been confirmed in lore, just not stated out directly. Long story short, there's just a flag that they found, and the flag had a thing, like the Champion of Blades test, where all of the greatest fighters in all of the Imperial Fist chapters show up, fight, and it's usually the Black Templar guy that walks away with the black sword. Yeah, that, and they found a Soul Drinker guy on the banner from like thousands of years ago, so it just basically confirmed that they're an Imperial Fist successor. But it didn't specifically say that was a Soul Drinker, so it could totally not have been. That's not how that works, but like, okay, but like, when I say the Carcharodons were a chapter of Marines that were totally formed of the exiled Terran Marines that were considered to be too mean, it basically checks off all the boxes that you need to for this to be canon. Just, you know, competitive disregard for human life, theft of people, keeping slaves, shit that, although isn't current era Raven Guard, was very much pre-Corax era Raven Guard, with them being especially impressive. And they constantly talk about being exiled by someone they hold in great reverence. It almost feels like they've deified Corax and feel like they need to earn his respect back. But I don't know. Basically, literally what the Raven Guard would be if Corax didn't teach them how to harness the Sable brand the way that they normally do in the Raven Guard now. Instead, just kind of left them to figure it out, which they did. They just let it show up and somehow harness it as a weapon. So since they were exiled, they formed their own incredibly unique chapter culture around them, fostered their own mutations and such. It's one of the easiest to a chapter origins, to be honest. But regardless, this has led them to a long history of nomadic and horrid violence perpetrated against the likes of, well, damn near anything that exists in the Outer Dark. But also, the thing that kinda got them into the mainstream eye was the Bad F one. Yeah, we're gonna kinda talk about that a little bit. It wasn't a big deal. I want to do a Bad Ad video at some point. It's just there's so many disparate sources to kind of put together to understand it. But regardless, they were one of the chapters that was on the Loyalist side during that conflict. Though mostly operating independently from the rest of the Marines, they did kind of still focus on that singular purpose of killing every last traitor that they possibly could. Though I would be remiss to not mention their, for some reason, especially horrendously no good zero karma hatred of the Mantis Warriors, which were a successor of the Marauders, which are a successor of the White Scars. Yeah, it's complicated. So the Mantis Warriors had sworn an honor debt to the Astro Claws, and for a little bit thought they were doing the right thing. That was until the fucking sharks showed up and started twisting heads off like they were Snapple caps, and yanking arms off like they were starting a lawnmower. Yeah, precision stealth chapter with guerrilla tactics is not going to really do much against the pace of the fucking unga-bunga, I play Saul bad guy level tactics that the Carcharodons were going to do. Like, for real, the Mantis Warriors would be setting up sniper positions, and there would always just be a single Carcharodon about 20 feet away, seeing the execution prompt from a God of War game hovering above their head. It's fucking bloodbath, man. It's horrendous. With much of the chapter of the Mantis Warriors being wiped out, and after they surrendered, reasonably, I believe, is, you know, they don't want to die and get
Yeah, maybe I'll have more luck here.
Wish to die with the Astral Claws, as they saw what they were turning into. So they admitted that, went on a penance crusade, which they survived somehow, which you really hear about that. And then, as another part of their penance, they had to give up their homeworld in Utheka to the Carcharodons for recruitment, which is what I mentioned earlier when I said that the Carcharodons do have a bit of a weird world that they can draw from, but from what I can tell, they still prefer to be a nomad predation, who's and what's it. So they tend to sail the stars, horrible, big, nasty whatevers for wherever they go. Also, I'm just going to say it, the Space Sharks and the Carcharodons are probably the same chapter. If you didn't know, the original printing of the chapters of the Bad Ad War to tell you how to paint different chapters, there was a chapter that looked almost identical to the Carcharodons, with albeit a different but comedic logo, and they were just called the Space Sharks. And yeah, they're just the Carcharodons, which, okay, Carcharodon Astra literally translates to Space Sharks. GW just retconned the logo to make it a little bit more respectable. It's not that hard to understand. So with the basics of their history out of the way, and bitch you a little bit about the Mantis Warriors along the way, let's cover some of the cultural basics of their chapter, and wrap this up by talking about him. Sunana is the last thing we can bring up. I just need to bait the hook here, because the capital H, him, is one of the coolest space marines in the entire setting, period. So, if you know, you know, but we'll be getting patience. The culture of the Carcharodons under a microscope is pretty interesting, as their entire shtick kind of revolves around one singular concept and its derivatives, which is silence. They are predators who prefer the silence of the void above all else. Because of this, it leads them to base all of their actions around the idea of being quiet. Sure, they are overly aggressive and tend to use weapons that make a lot of noise, more so than, you know, the other options available to them, but they themselves tend to put a lot of stock in ritualistic meditation that leads to personal silence. And it also comes with long days of contemplation. The sort of silence that is found inside of them can be kind of seen as the same silence that is found in the Sisters of Silence. My god, that's a lot of sibilants. They actively have to find that sort of void inside them, this spot where they hear, see, and feel nothing. This numbness is used to still their bloodlust caused by the blindness, their weird genetic curse. They have long periods of meditation caused by their cryosleep. It also allows them to develop their minds, which is cool. I do put a lot of stock into meditation myself, as meditation is one of those things where you kind of need to disconnect from the world around you and focus on, like, particular topics that you need to think of for yourself rather than have the background noise of daily life kind of pollute your thoughts in that way. I think it's really important. I think the chapter's obsession with silence is probably the way they found to conquer the Sable brand, without Corvus Corax being around, obviously. And to some degree, it works. But it works in the same way the Flesh Terrors deciding to say it and just let the Black Rage do its thing kind of worked for them. It works, but only kind of. These individuals are the only chapter I can think of that I can consider mindful berserkers. They are savage brutes, but are deeply aware of their every action. Only the freshest of the Battle Brothers are in less control of this sort of battle lust that they have, and thus why they're not even given names until they can prove that they are able to control themselves properly. This is a chapter that sees rage showing itself as incredible weakness. When it comes to combat and, you know, murdering other enemies, it has for compassionless efficiency. Like a predator hunting for food in the endless depths of the ocean, they aren't angry at what they have to do, they simply kill and eat in order to survive. Which is why their chapter master, certified wide load, Tyberos, is one of the coolest chapter masters in the goddamn setting. Yeah, it's time we start talking about the he now. Tyberos is held in such a mythical status in the Warhammer community, and for good fucking reason. This dude standing a little taller than your standard Primaris Marine as a firstborn is pretty big. Now, I know that there's a common myth that they use Dreadnought plating to reinforce his Terminator armor, but that's never really been confirmed. But regardless, his special relic Terminator armor is actually pretty damn intimidating when you see it due to its sheer size. Tyros goes by the title The Red Wake for a reason, and that's because of so many factors that listing them off would take so while, so let's skim a few off the top and, lightning round this shit. 1. By weight class. Without armor, he is probably the largest Space Marine in the setting right now. Although, maybe not the tallest, he does have a weird amount of heft and width to him by a large margin. 2. His Terminator armor is heavily modified. It seems to be almost 100% custom built for him due to his size and shape, and thus makes the armor incredibly rare in and of its own right, but it's also made from archaeotech and just a bunch of random plates that seem to no longer be able to be produced anymore. So his Terminator armor, in theory, is stronger than the strongest pattern of Terminator armor that was ever produced, like Saturnine power armor. 3. His weapons, Hunger and Slake, kind of overkill, TBH. They are a double stack, Power Fist, Lightning Claws, and Chain Fists all wrapped into 2 hands. They are quite literally the most fucking over-the-top weapons I've seen in the history of this setting. This dude literally found a way to make a practical approach of Zahando from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 4 in melee. It's fucking insane. Considering how large this boy is, he could just swipe his hand in your general direction and there'd just be a smear and some sludge on the ground where you were. 4.
Well, I'm going to get some dinner and I'll be right back.
It probably has to